When I talk about Czechoslovakia during the Second World War, most people will think of the Sudeten crisis and the subsequent Munich Agreement, here called the Munich Betrayal. And shortly after, Hitler annexed the remaining Czech lands. What exactly happened here during the German occupation? What about resistance? What about collaboration? This here is another Countries in World War II episode. We're going to talk about the Czech Lands, or Czechia, during the Second World War. Keep watching. Hey, good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, I'm Stefan, I'm a Dutch history teacher. I like to cover history on location as I'm now in Prague. And if you find this content interesting, consider subscribing and also hit that notification bell. And I want to say that this video is sponsored by me and my patrons who support me via Patreon, PayPal, or via a super thanks, and you can do that too. So see the information below the video, and let's start with the episode. What is today known as the Czech Republic, or Czechia, was back in the day part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which crumbled towards the end of the First World War. And then in October 1918, the Czechoslovak National Council declared Czechoslovakia independent from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was supported by the Allies. Now do notice that the country's inhabitants were not only Czechs or Slovaks. Czechoslovakia contained more ethnic Germans, 23% of the overall population, than Slovaks, plus sizable communities of Ruthenes and Magyars. And this mixed population led to problems in the years to come. In 1938, there was the Sudeten crisis. Adolf Hitler demanded the Sudetenland to become part of German Reich because of its many ethnic Germans living in that area. He mobilized his army and he was prepared to wage war. But countries as France and Britain, they had an appeasement policy. And in 1938, the Munich Conference took place, where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, as well as the French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier, came together to meet Hitler in Munich. Also, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was there, but there were no representatives of Czechoslovakia invited. And it was decided that the Sudeten area, the Sudetenland, became part of the German Reich. Now the Munich Agreement is here called the Munich Betrayal because it left the remaining Czechoslovak Republic vulnerable for a future attack, and that attack came. In March 1939, Hitler broke his promise and annexed the rest of the Czech lands. Slovakia became a Nazi puppet state. Hungary gained some parts, and so did Poland actually, with the exception of the Battle of the Shashanek Barracks, where Czech soldiers fought against German forces for a brief while. The German takeover happened without much violence, as the Czechoslovak army was ordered to stand down. Much of the Czechoslovak defense works were located in the already lost Sudeten area. On Hitler's orders, on the 16th of March 1939, he formally guaranteed the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The Protectorate had neither its own representation abroad nor rights to an independent army. The government's army was assigned a symbolic role and filled only ancillary services. Parliament was dissolved and political life was simplified. It eventually came down to annexation. The Czech authorities functioned as the German subsidiary executive organs. With the establishment of an autonomous administration, the Reich was able to govern the Czech population more efficiently, which was beneficial for them, and it also facilitated the desired changes in the Protectorate's way of life. The ultimate goal was Germanization, and to make the Czech lands become a part of the German Reich. However, due to the need to utilize the economic potential of the Protectorate and Czech workforce for their war efforts, the Germans were unable to accomplish their final aim during the war. The Nazis introduced a wartime-focused economic system regarding social development. The forced labor regime played a crucial role in Germany and the Protectorate, later evolving into forced assignment of work. The Czech lands held great significance for Germany, as it had a lot of industries and weapons arsenal. Also, till late in the war, the Czech lands were not bombed by the Allies. Many Czech workers were forcibly sent to work in factories in Germany, and by the fall of 1943 their numbers had reached 30,000, with more to come as the Luftwaffe's requirements for aircraft production brought in another 10,000 workers in the spring of 1944. The property of the Czech Jews quickly fell in German hands, and in June 1939 the Nuremberg racial policies were applied in the Protectorate. In November 1941, the concentration camp of Terezin or Theresienstadt was established. It was a Jewish ghetto, and from there many Jews were deported to the death camps. From January 1942 till October 1944, mass deportations took place, and the majority of the 118,300 Czech Jews perished in the gas chambers. An estimated 75,000 Czech Jews did not survive the Second World War. Also, Roma and Sinti ended in the concentration and death camps of Auschwitz, Buchenwald and Ravensbrück. 4,500 were deported, of which only 538 survived. A key figure in this was the deputy Reichsprotektor, and I'm talking about Reinhard Heydrich. And this brings me to the resistance, because one of the most well-known acts of the Czechoslovak resistance was the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. It was codenamed Operation Anthropoid. Heydrich had become Deputy Reichsprotektor from the 27th of September 1941. He implemented martial law, and hundreds of Czechs were executed. He was nicknamed the Butcher of Prague. Two Czechoslovak soldiers, Jan Kubic and Josef Gabčík, were parachuted in the area with British help at the end of December 1941. After months of planning and cooperation with the resistance organizations and another parachutist, Josef Walčík, they carried out their mission in Prague on the 27th of May 1942. As a result, Heydrich got mortally wounded and would die of his wounds several days later. The parachutists would fight themselves to death in a local church. The Nazis executed a horrible vengeance. Family members of the parachutists were killed or deported. In total, 1,500 Czechs were killed and 3,000 arrested. The villages of Lidice and Lichaki were razed to the ground, and its inhabitants murdered or deported. After Heydrich's death, authority passed to the State Secretary Karl Hermann Frank. Czech resistance to the occupier occurred from the get-go. Organized resistance began to take shape at the beginning of 1940, where a central resistance body was formed, the Central Committee of Home Resistance, the UVOD. This body was recognized by the Czech government in exile that was led by Edvard Beneš. Now, Beneš was a Czechoslovak president before the German takeover. Not only he, but also the puppet prime minister of the Protectorate, Alois Eliáš, cooperated with the resistance. He was murdered by the Nazis in 1942. The Communist Party, the KSC, developed an underground organization. Edvard Beneš lobbied for international recognition of his post-war government of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovak soldiers were also fighting in France, North Africa, as well as the Middle East, and Czechoslovak pilots took part in the Battle of Britain. So let's discuss Czech collaboration. Well, this here is a fairly gray area. I mean, of course, there were the Sudeten Germans that were more than happy to support the Nazi regime, but let's talk about the Czechs. One important person was President Emil Hácha, who succeeded Beneš and basically functioned as the Czech president under the Nazi regime. Now, Hácha became more and more compliant with the Germans. Do notice that his deteriorating health played a part in this, and he swore an oath of allegiance to Hitler, but do notice that the Nazis threatened to kill 2,000 Czech students if he did not comply. Now, from the get-go, the Germans presented themselves as occupiers. Now, do notice that the Czechs were seen as suitable for Germanization, but there were no recruitment policies to recruit Czechs for the Eastern Front. There was a Czech organization against Bolshevism, but they held meetings and that was it. And there was one demented ex-Czechoslovak army officer that wanted to raise a volunteer army to fight on the Eastern Front, which the Germans categorically refused. Only towards the end of the war, when Germany was losing the war, they did comply, and he eventually managed to raise 13 volunteers Yes, you heard it correctly, 13. I believe the project was quickly abandoned. A Czech force under the Germans that was raised was the government army, which consisted of 12 battalions as well as police and gendarmerie. Most of the government army was sent to northern Italy in 1944 to serve as laborers and guards. There is a debate as to whether the government army should be considered a collaborationist force, but its commanding officer, Jaroslav Emminger, was acquitted of collaboration charges after World War II. Some of his members joined the Czechoslovak resistance and joined the Czech resistance during the Prague Uprising, which took place in May 1945. And this brings me to the liberation. Let's take a look at neighboring Slovakia first. Slovakia became a Nazi puppet state in 1939 under Josef Tiso. From the spring of 1944, it became clear to most Slovaks that the Slovak Republic would not survive this war. Around that time, Soviet partisans were dropped in the east and the center of the country and organized resistance. Slovak communists and their sympathizers joined them. They committed acts of sabotage. Martial law was declared, but it merely existed on paper since the Slovak police was not able to get the situation under control. As a result, the Slovak army mutinied against the Axis. 60,000 Slovak insurgent forces were able to stop the Germans for 2 months. Towards the end of October, the Germans had suppressed the uprising and occupied the whole nation. Eventually, the Red Army reached Bratislava early April 1945, and they then moved up to Prague. The Slovak national uprising resulted in an intensification of resistance activities in the Protectorate. Now, from September till October 1944, also parachutists were dropped in Bohemia and Moravia to organize resistance, but they were not able to raise an effective resistance organization, though the partisans did not succeed in organizing a unified staff due to the constant pressure of the occupiers and increased concentration of German troops and the movement of the front line. They did in various places influence the rebellion and the liberation of Moravia and Bohemia. In the west, the first American troops were ready to push into Bohemia from Germany. Now, the Germans had multiple goals at this point: preventing internal unrest and holding off the Allies as long as possible. On the 25th of April, command authority in the Protectorate was transferred to Field Marshal Ferdinand Schöne, a Nazi hardliner who had condemned countless soldiers to death for cowardice. Karl Hermann Frank tried to prevent rebellion by attempting to negotiate with the Americans. As days progressed, Hitler committed suicide, and Berlin, the Reich's capital, fell in the hands of the Soviets. Yet, Prague was still in the hands of the Nazis. Different factions of the Czech resistance, headed by the Czech National Council, the CNC, launched an uprising in Prague on the 5th of May 1945. The Czech radio broadcasts gave the signal for the uprising and served as coordinator for the resistance fighters. On the first days of the uprising, the rebels achieved some victories and put the Germans on the defense. At the same time, the Americans pushed into the country from the west. Now, this disrupted the German plans to evacuate their troops from east to west. German units made a counterattack on the 6th of May 1945, and SS troops rushed to the city, leaving a trail of death and destruction. The Czechoslovak resistance found an ally that had switched side from the Germans. These were the men of the pro-Axis Russian Liberation Army that was led by Nazi collaborator Andrei Vlasov. Now, the resistance also learned about the Soviet-American demarcation line, which meant the Americans were not coming to liberate Prague. As the Germans signed the document of capitulation in Reims in France, the Battle of Prague raged on in the outlying districts as well as the city center. On the 8th of May, German General Rudolf Toussaint signed the protocol which allowed their retreat west. Finally, in the early hours of the 9th of May, the German unconditional surrender became a fact. And on that day, Soviet forces entered the Czech capital. Now, to all Czech viewers, I'm really curious, what do you think of this video? How is World War II mostly remembered in this country? Thanks to my patrons, you see their names right now, and a special thanks to Thomas Zabiega, Damian Wallace, Connor, Philip Jordan, Marcus Kaas, Nick Terranova, Haley, Mark Littlehill, Janik Jojankiewicz, Joanne, Justin Tabell, Tanya Dixie, Henry Clarkson, Rob Park, Andrea Martic, Susanna Di Bella, John Beach, Fabrizio, Wayback History, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, and Mike West. After World War II, a democratic Czechoslovakia was reborn, but it was not to last, as in 1948 the communists seized power. Also, Germans were forcibly expelled after the war was over. If you want to learn about the expulsions of Germans after World War II, click here, and click here for my video about Slovakia during World War II. And I thank you for watching. Best wishes from Prague, Czech Republic.